On with strength production, we're going to talk about how we learned on the other lecture that a muscle, when it is contracted, it shortens. And what we call that is we call that the concentric contraction. A lot of times in a layman's sense, we'll call that the positive portion of the movement versus the negative portion of the movement. You'll see a lot of common people say, let's do some negatives. On an arm curl, using this example, a negative would be when you're fighting resistance on the way down in terms of a lifting technique. Now, when we're talking about purely on a scientific basis, the concentric contraction is the muscles shortens, which means it contracts, as it moves against force, which is the positive. The purpose of the movement, when you're doing a curl, the purpose is to bend your elbow. So as you're bending your elbow, actively bending your elbow, then that would apply to the muscle, not to the elbow joint, but to the muscle we're talking about, which in this case is the biceps brachii. Now, the eccentric is the lengthening portion, okay? So when we're allowing the dumbbell to go down, back into the neutral position, these fibers will actually lengthen right here, what we call our sarcomeres here. Now, the opposite would apply, for example, in a tricep extension. When you're actively extending the elbow, utilizing the back of your arms right here, your triceps, your tricep will shorten as it contracts and it extends the elbow down. So that means the going down portion on a tricep press down when you're actively pushing a cable down is the concentric phase, and the returning it back up is the eccentric phase. On a squat, if we're looking at the quads as the muscle we're focusing on, when the purpose of my quadriceps is to extend my knee. So as I descend into the squat, that is the eccentric phase because these muscles are lengthening. And as I return back up in position, I'm contracting my quadriceps, which is a concentric phase. Basically, if you'll think about concentric as contracting when the muscle is, but you have to look at only the muscle we're focusing on is what we call our primary muscle. We have different types of things to consider as well. An isometric contraction is a contraction where we're actually not moving. It's tension without change in range of motion. And during an isometric or a static contraction, the muscle exerts a force that counteracts an opposing force. So if I was to take my hand and I'm pushing against my other hand and I'm not moving anywhere, there's tension being exerted in my arms. But my tricep, my shoulder, is not changing length of motion. Okay? I'm not actively shortening and lengthening my tricep here. I'm at a static contraction. If I was to push against this table and I would push down and not move, that would be an example of an isometric. So the muscle length does not change, so no movement occurs, and the joint position is maintained. So that's called an isometric contraction. We talked about a little bit the other day, prime mover being also known as the agonistic mover, and that's the muscle that provides the major movement. In a bench press, our prime mover is our pectoralis major. In a pull-up, our prime mover is our latissimus dorsi. And that is the major mover, as opposed to like the assister. Like on a bench press, the assister would be our triceps because it helps to assist the motion, and our anterior deltoids, the front. And is it a good example there? We want to make sure that we understand that a prime mover and an agonist work against, in a sense they are opposites, which is hence the word antagonist, is the muscle that oppose or reverse a particular movement. So on the example a minute ago, I talked about biceps and triceps on the concentric and eccentric. Well, they are antagonistic towards each other. So if we were doing a curl, actively using our bicep, that would be the prime mover is the bicep. The antagonist is the tricep. And vice versa. If I was pushing down and actively using my tricep, that would be the prime mover or agonist in this case. And the bicep all of a sudden becomes the antagonist, okay? And so when a prime mover is active, the antagonist muscles are in stretched and relaxed state. On the squats, if we are contracting our quads, our hamstrings would have to be relaxing, okay? If we're doing a leg curl where you're bending your knee, actively using your hamstring, as you curl that leg, as you bend that knee, my hamstring would be the prime mover, and my quadriceps would have to lengthen in order for that to happen, so they would be the antagonist in that example. Assisters, we talked about just a second ago. Those are the muscles that assist the agonist or prime mover. And that was the example I used a second ago with the anterior deltoids and the triceps in the bench press. It's the thing that takes over when you can no longer do it with the prime mover. The stabilizers, or fixators if you will, are muscles that stabilize one joint so the desired movement can occur at another joint. Okay, you'll see people doing, for example, the tricep press down with a cable. You got a cable here, I'm pushing this down. But you'll see people doing this and really not bending their elbow. The whole purpose of the tricep is to lock those elbows on the sides and then focus on elbow extension. If you're doing this and this, you're really kind of almost doing like a lat pull down, working these lats. So I want my stabilizers, it's going to be my trapezius and rhomboids muscles, which fix those shoulder blades to my sides, and then my deltoids to keep my humerus, my arm bone, locked in there, so all I'm doing is elbow extension, which is what a tricep press down is for. So the stabilizers are very important for allowing proper form.